If you have any of these symptoms, then it may be a sign that your hormones are out of balance. Irregular periods, painful periods, very heavy periods, perhaps a period that's completely gone AWOL, hair thinning or hair loss, acne and abnormal hair growth, intense cravings, weight gain, especially weight that's difficult to lose, if you've been diagnosed with PCOS or endometriosis or fibroids, and any other symptoms that may be associated with your period, things like PMS and extreme mood swings. These are all signals to you that something may be out of balance in your reproductive hormones and potentially some of your other hormones like cortisol, insulin, and your thyroid hormones. And so in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some ways that you can restore balance to your body's hormones. If you're new to me, I'm Dr. Carmen, and I am an integrative medical doctor and health coach, and I enjoy creating content about balancing your hormones and general reproductive health, as well as medicinal cannabis. So if you are interested in these topics, then please go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and let's dive in to some of the ways that you can bring back hormone harmony into your life. So I like to think about our body's hormones as a symphony. So think of an orchestra. There are multiple different people who are playing instruments as part of an orchestra. And so when each person is playing their particular instrument in tune and according to the music that everybody's following, then beautiful music is what results. And we kind of think about this as like everything being in harmony. If you've ever been in a facility or a place where you're able to listen to a live orchestra playing, then you know that symphony of music that is so thoroughly rejuvenating and very pleasant to listen to. And so the same thing is true for your hormones. Your hormones are released from glands throughout your body, and they basically exert their functions on different parts of your body in unison. So everything needs to be kind of happening in sync and in a way that actually makes sure that everything is in balance in your body. In other words, ensuring that everything is in homeostasis. And so we can kind of think about that harmony of our hormones in a similar way that we think of music coming from an orchestra. But what happens when that orchestra is playing out of tune, or perhaps someone in the orchestra is playing to their own music, or maybe the components of the orchestra that are not there? Then that music won't sound as harmonious. It may even be disturbing to listen to. And so in a similar way, when one or a few of your hormones are out of balance, then this can result in disruption in your hormones, and then all these symptoms can occur. So in the medical community, this idea of hormone balance and hormone imbalance is a hotly debated topic. And that's because most conventional doctors were not trained that hormone imbalance is an actual diagnosis or an actual condition that happens in people. And the reason for that is because we kind of learn about medicine in different categories and different silos. And there are certain concepts in conventional medicine that don't really translate. You may be familiar with some of these topics, things like leaky gut syndrome, for example. It's not an official diagnosis that people who are conventionally trained doctors will accept as a real thing. But in the integrative and functional medicine space, there are all kinds of conditions that we pay attention to in a way that perhaps in conventional medicine we're unable to do. Because oftentimes in conventional medicine, doctors will do a bunch of blood tests, they will examine you, perhaps order things like x-rays or ultrasounds, and then gather all this information and come up with a diagnosis and a management plan. But the issue is that there are a large number of people who just generally don't feel good. They feel very tired. They feel like they have intense cravings. They have brain fog. They're struggling with weight gain. And perhaps they go to a doctor runs all the tests that are required, and really nothing comes up as abnormal. And so oftentimes these people are told and reassured that nothing is wrong with you and everything's fine and you're actually going to be okay. And in some instances, people are actually made to feel like they're just making up their symptoms and that it's all in their head. And that's really where integrative medicine and functional medicine fits in, because we really look at the patient or the person holistically. And the feedback that we get from patients or from the people that we see in integrative and functional medicine are very important clues, and they're bits of information that we really want to take into consideration when looking at what may be going wrong. And so there are a number of different scenarios that can occur where you may be feeling horrible, but your blood tests are completely normal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing wrong with you. And so your conventionally trained doctor may not acknowledge this idea of hormone imbalance. So just a heads up about that. But we all know that if there are things that are not functioning well or that are slightly out of sync or out of balance in your body, that this can have an impact on your overall health and well-being. And so we're going to get into some of the things that you can do to restore balance to your hormones, whether you have been formally diagnosed with a medical condition or whether you just have a bunch of symptoms and haven't really been told or been able to pinpoint what exactly is going on. These are general things that anybody can do right now that can help to make you not only feel better, but generally will help to restore your overall health and well-being. And so first and foremost, it is important for you to go and get formally assessed. And the reason for this is because we need to know if there is a formally diagnosable medical condition that may be triggering your symptoms. So things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, these are all conditions that can be diagnosed using conventional blood tests and things like ultrasounds, or even by going into theater for something known as a laparoscopy, which is really where doctors will put cameras into the pelvis or the abdomen and will go ahead and look and see if there's any evidence of disease. And so it's very important that if you are having symptoms, that you discuss them with your healthcare provider to work together and try to determine if there is a diagnosis that you may be sitting with. And the reason why that's important is because if you can come to a diagnosis, it definitely makes it a lot easier to be able to know what are some of the things that you can begin to do in your lifestyle to help to reduce your symptoms and potentially reverse that condition. But for example, if you have been to your doctor and you've run a bunch of blood tests or you've had a bunch of investigations done, and you still haven't come up with the diagnosis, that's fine too, because some of the things that you can implement will still help you. But the very first step is to make sure that you get assessed, because we don't want to miss something that could potentially be managed or treated by perhaps an operation or perhaps even by certain specific interventions. Okay, so the second thing that you can do is try to eat for hormonal health. Now, there are a number of different foods that we could be eating on a daily basis that could be disrupting our hormones without us even realizing it. But I'm just going to go through very quickly the top 3 foods that are known to disrupt our hormones. And the first one is sugar. Now, I know that this is a sore topic for a lot of us, but ultimately sugar disrupts 2 of probably our most important hormones, and that is cortisol and insulin. And these hormones, if you think of your hormones as being in a hierarchy, they're right at the top. Sugar disrupts our cortisol levels and it puts us on a blood sugar roller coaster, which eventually spikes our insulin and causes things like insulin resistance and triggers inflammation. And these are fuel to the hormone imbalance fire. So sugar is probably one of the most disrupting foods for our hormones. And we really need to start thinking about how we can better manage our blood sugar levels so that we can jump off that blood sugar roller coaster. Okay, so the second food that may be disrupting your hormones is dairy. Now, I know that this is a hotly debated topic and there are very polarizing views on dairy, But I just want you to go with me for a second, because it is important for us to consider how dairy may potentially be contributing to our hormone disruption. So the way dairy is produced today is very different from the way it was produced before. Oftentimes, dairy is coming from a factory farming setting where we're actually going into this mass production of dairy to meet the high demand for these types of foods. And so animals are often given things like growth hormones and antibiotics to increase their production of dairy. And ultimately, those antibiotics and the hormones will actually find their way into the dairy that we are consuming. And so if you think about ingesting hormones and ingesting antibiotics that could potentially disrupt your gut, you can see how this may result in an imbalance in your own body's hormones. But another thing is that many people are actually lactose intolerant, and so they have difficulty digesting dairy. And so ultimately, this can also lead to inflammation in the gut. And we know that gut inflammation is one of the many root cause drivers of chronic illness. And so I know that a lot of people are really almost addicted to cheese, and they really can't see themselves living or eating without including dairy into their diets. And while there are some people who may be able to tolerate dairy, and in particular cleaner sources of dairy, so dairy that's not produced in a mass production setting, for a lot of people, eliminating dairy can literally be the one thing that's standing in the way of your overall hormone balance and feeling a lot better in your own body. And so this, I would really consider, or I'd really encourage you to consider eliminating dairy for a period of time, and then checking in and seeing after you reintroduce it after about a period of 21 days how you feel. And if you really feel like your symptoms are starting to come back after reintroducing dairy, then you may want to consider leaving this out of your diet altogether. The third food that may be disrupting your hormones is gluten. Now, our sensitivity to gluten really falls on a spectrum. Everything from very mild symptoms of a bit of indigestion all the way to celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease that is triggered by gluten. And so this may or may not apply to you, but here again, I would encourage you to cut out gluten from your diet and see how your body responds, and try and monitor your symptoms to really be intentional about seeing if there is a difference if you don't include gluten in your diet. Now, some people may be allergic to gluten, but other people may just be sensitive to it. And for others, it's a complete no-no, and they have to go on a strict gluten-free diet. But gluten, again, often triggers inflammation inside our gut, leading to leaky gut syndrome. And this can lead to a host of different symptoms that are linked to inflammation. And so those are the three foods that I would suggest that you look at if you are trying to eat for hormone health. But there are a number of different foods that we can add into the diet and include in our diets that will actually nourish and support our healthy hormone balance. And so you can find a host of different recipes that are absolutely delicious. They are naturally gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, and they're all included in the 21-day Hormone Harmony Detox. You can find a link to that program in the description box below. Okay, so the third thing that you can do to try and bring balance to your hormones is to look at ways to manage your stress levels. Now, I know that this is easier said than done, and this is going to look really different for different people, but I'd really encourage you to really research and try and find ways to help to reduce the amount of stress that you are placed under on a daily basis, whether that is reviewing your schedule, reviewing your relationships, and trying to cut out some of the toxic relationships that you may be in, whether it's going on a social media detox, whether it's trying to manage your space and declutter, and then also to try and implement some practices that will help you to relieve stress. Things like exercising, meditation, journaling, yoga, going out into nature. nurturing some of the relationships, being in a space and around people that actually build you up and make you feel good. So important here is to try and reduce the amount of toxic burden that you are under, so the amount of stressful situations that you find yourself in. And then also developing practices that help you to release some of the stress. I know that some people say that it's impossible to live without stress, and it really is. Unfortunately, we live in a very stressful world. It's just part of life, I guess. But that doesn't mean that we can't do anything about trying to manage our stress levels. And whether that is reducing the amount of exposure to stress, or implementing practices that help us to manage the amount of stress that we're under, we really have to become more intentional about making sure that we address this very, very important area of our lives. Because stress is one of the main root cause drivers of hormonal imbalance. And so I'd really try to encourage you to nurture yourself. Self-care is not selfish. Remember that you have to take care of yourself first before that you try and take care of other people. You can't give from an empty cup. So really look at your own self-care practices and try to optimize those so that you can actually reduce some of the stress that you are placed under. Okay, so the next thing that we can do to bring more balance to our hormones is to move our bodies. Now, I'm not talking about an intense exercise routine here. For a lot of us, when we think about exercise, we think of something very unpleasant. We think about going to the gym a couple days a week and really, drilling our bodies and forcing our bodies to comply to an exercise routine, an exercise program that leaves us feeling completely wrecked and completely wiped out. We think about boot camps and really intense physical activity. But it doesn't have to be like that. Movement is a great way to nurture your body, to make sure that you are releasing some of that stress that we talked about earlier. But it's also a fantastic way to bring balance to your hormones, because the more you move your body, the less insulin resistant you will become, the less cortisol you will release, and the better your hormones will communicate with each other. And so people often ask, what is the best exercise to do? And the answer is the one that you will do. But in particular, when we think about bringing balance to our hormones, we have to be very careful and very intentional not to stress our bodies out by the practices and the exercises that we are doing. So here we really want to include gentle workouts, gentle movements, and make sure that our workouts and our exercise routines are not too long, because the longer you work out and the more intense your workouts are, the more stressed your body is going to become, the more cortisol you'll release, and the cycle will just continue. So try and incorporate resistance exercises into your routine. Try to incorporate stretching and even weights in your routines or your exercise programs. You can do bursts of exercise that are a bit shorter, so things like high intensity interval training. These are short bursts of exercise as opposed to doing a long protracted boot camp or a really intense cardio workout. If you do enjoy cardio, I'd suggest keeping your workouts to a shorter period, and perhaps even splitting up your workouts and doing 2 workouts in the day instead of 1 long workout. And ultimately, you can also just try to increase the amount of movement that you have throughout the day. So for example, if you are working at a desk, you can get one of those desk stands to elevate your workspace, and you can alternate between standing and sitting throughout the day. Perhaps if you get a phone call, you can take your phone call while walking around. Perhaps if you go to the mall, you can park a little bit further away from the entrance so that you can get a little bit of a walk in. You can take the stairs instead of using the elevator. Just find ways to incorporate more movement into your daily life. And a great tip is to add in about 10 minutes of movement within an hour's window of eating. So let's say, for example, you've had your dinner at 6 p.m. Between the time you finish your meal and the next hour, try and get in 10 minutes of movement. So whether that's taking a walk around the block, doing a bit of yoga, a bit of Pilates, or just cleaning up and decluttering your space. Try and get moving an hour after you've had a meal. This is a fantastic way to bring balance into your blood sugar levels, and it's a great way to bring balance into your hormones in general. The fifth way that you can help to bring balance into your hormones is by detoxing from endocrine disrupting chemicals. Now, that's a mouthful, but endocrine disrupting chemicals are chemicals that we are exposed to on a daily basis throughout our daily routine that could potentially be disrupting our hormones. Now, this is a whole topic on its own, but very quickly, there are chemicals in our environment, in our food, in our air, in our water, in our personal care products, in our cleaning products, on our furniture, on our clothing, pretty much everywhere that could be disrupting our hormones. And so it's very important for us to pay attention to what these chemicals are, how we are exposed to them, and then trying to eliminate them from our lifestyles. Now, before you get too overwhelmed, because once you start looking into this, it's really a rabbit hole, and you can start to feel like you are not safe anywhere you are, and you should be living in a bubble somewhere away from everything and everyone. Before you get to that stage, I want to say to you that it's important to take it slow and to work on one thing at a time, and to do what you can to eliminate your exposures as much as possible. And so one of the ways that you can do this is by reading the labels of your personal care products, your cleaning products, and really getting to understand and know more about what's actually in those products. And then you can look for alternatives, either brands that create or make products that are not going to be so chemical laden and disruptive to your hormones. And you can even learn how to make these products yourself. I've included a lot more information about endocrine disrupting chemicals and what you can do to eliminate them from your lifestyle in the 21-day Hormone Harmony Detox. Again, you can find a link to that program in the comment section in the description below. But I really would encourage you to start to learn more about what you're putting on your skin, what you're using to clean your home, what you are eating. So, for example, even foods that are not organic are often sprayed with chemicals like pesticides and herbicides, and these are known endocrine disrupting chemicals. And so it's not necessarily, what you're eating. So, for example, I'm eating vegetables, I'm eating fruit. It may also be what's on the food that you're eating. So just being aware of where your food comes from and what you are putting in and on your body, and really trying to detox your lifestyle as much as possible from these endocrine disrupting chemicals. Because really what these chemicals are doing is they are either blocking or mimicking our own body's hormones. One of the most common endocrine disrupting chemicals are known as xenoestrogens. And xeno really means like foreign or outside of, and estrogen obviously is estrogen. So these are estrogen-like substances that we are exposed to that act as estrogen inside our own bodies. And so you can only imagine that if we are exposed to huge amounts of these xenoestrogens, how disrupted and out of balance our hormones may be. And so that's the fifth way that I would suggest that you try and bring balance into your life, is to be aware of these endocrine disrupting chemicals and try to detox them out of your life as much as possible. Now, the next thing that you can do to try and bring balance back to your hormones is to eliminate caffeine. Now, before you freak out, if you're one of those people who has to have a cup of coffee in the morning to get you going, or if you have to have multiple cups of coffee throughout the day to keep you going, or if you experience extreme fatigue or brain fog and you feel like you just can't function if you don't have a hit of caffeine, either as coffee or energy drinks, then trust me, I can relate. But caffeine is one of those things that ultimately will cause hormone disruption because of the way it impacts our adrenal glands. It really triggers a stress response in your body. And ultimately, if you've become dependent on caffeine, then you're really not depending on it to increase your energy levels. You're depending on it to bring you up to your baseline. And so it is possible to develop a tolerance for caffeine and then require higher and higher amounts of it in order to achieve the same effect. But then ultimately, you reach a point where you kind of feel saturated, and it doesn't matter how much coffee you drink, it doesn't really have an effect on you. You'll find often people will say, oh, I can have a cup of coffee at night and it doesn't affect my sleep. And so the reason why it's very important for us to look at our caffeine intake is because of the impact on the adrenal glands. And so we know that the adrenal glands are responsible for releasing our stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And remember, we said that cortisol is right at the top there on the hormone hierarchy. So some people manage to go cold turkey and eliminate coffee or caffeine altogether, but you may consider doing it in a progressive way. So you can try to reduce the amount of caffeine that you are taking in on a daily basis, and then you can switch out your coffee for green tea, and then perhaps even decaffeinated green tea or decaffeinated coffee, and then you can go on to herbal teas. Some people find it helpful to include things like a chaga or mushroom coffee, or even a dandelion latte, or even a turmeric milk latte. There's recipes to all of these in the 21-day Hormone Harmony Detox. But ultimately, find what works for you, but paying attention to the amount of caffeine that you take in on a daily basis is really going to help you to bring balance back into your hormones. Speaking about sleep, this is the final thing that I want to share with you to try and bring balance back into your hormones, and that is to improve your sleep quality. Now again, you may say easier said than done, but ultimately sleep plays a vital role with our overall health and well-being, and it affects our hormones on so many levels. Ultimately, we need sleep to be able to restore and repair our body, to improve our memory. It's really the time where our immune system sorts out things like inflammation and the response to the outside world. It's also the time where our digestive tract does its maintenance. There's a lot of incredible things going on while you sleep. And if you don't have good quality sleep, then ultimately this can impact all kinds of hormones, from cortisol to insulin to ghrelin and leptin, melatonin, the list goes on. So getting good quality sleep is a critical piece in maintaining healthy hormone balance. And so a few things that you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to, of course, eliminate caffeine. So in particular, you want to try and avoid caffeinated drinks and stimulants after 1 o'clock, because the later you have these stimulants, the more impact you'll see on your sleep quality. Another thing is to create a routine around your sleep. Make sure that you're trying to go to bed and wake up at exactly the same time each and every day. You can have a winding down routine to kind of prepare you for bed. You can take an Epsom salt bath just before bed to try and soothe your muscles and help to relax you before bed. Try and avoid screens at least 1 hour before bedtime, but preferably 2 hours before bedtime. And you can really try to include things like journaling and perhaps even a bit of meditation just before you go to sleep. Improving your sleep hygiene will take you very far with helping to restore balance back into your hormones. So you can go ahead and check out this video up next and leave me your questions in the comment section below. I'll see you in the next video.